China is to suspend cooperation with the United States on issues including military relations, climate change and legal help in criminal matters. Now, this is in response to the visit of US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. The visit's enraged Beijing, which regards the self-governing island as its territory. This latest announcement follows days of intensive Chinese military drills in the waters surrounding the island.
Chinese missiles began striking the seas north, south and east of Taiwan hours after U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi left the island. Chinese state television released video of warships patrolling the Taiwan Strait, for decades an unofficial buffer zone between China and Taiwan. As fighter jets cruise the skies above, air cover for the multiple no-go danger zones declared by China in some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world.
China has chosen to overreact and use Speaker Pelosi's visit as a pretext to increase provocative military activity in and around the Taiwan Strait.
Blinken is in Cambodia for a ministerial meeting of Southeast Asian nations. Although his Chinese counterpart is also there, Blinken says the two have no plans to meet.
The fact is, the Speaker's visit was peaceful. There is no justification for this extreme, disproportionate, and escalatory military response.
China sees Taiwan as a breakaway province which will eventually come under Beijing's control and is deeply opposed to any visits by foreign governments.
What China is defending is its own sovereignty and territorial integrity. What China is doing is safeguarding the basic norms governing international relations and the common interests of most countries. Non-interference in internal affairs is a most basic principle for maintaining peace and stability in our world.
Faced with the unprecedented scale of China's reaction, Taiwan has put its military on alert and is staging civil defense drills. Across the Taiwan Strait on the Chinese side, tourists come to this coastal town hoping to witness the military exercises.
Indeed, China is a powerful country, and it will not allow anyone to offend its own territory.
They take photos in front of a sign which reads, "The closest place of mainland motherland to Taiwan Island."
We crossed the middle line of the Taiwan Strait with military exercises. Our missiles flew over Taiwan, which makes us feel our motherland is very strong and makes us certain Taiwan's return cannot be stopped.
China's army says its so-called joint blockage operation around Taiwan will continue through to Monday.
Let's get into this with Michael Beckley. He's an associate professor of political science at Tufts University in Massachusetts. He's also co-author of the upcoming book, Danger Zone, the Coming Conflict with China. Welcome to DW. Nancy Pelosi was in Taiwan for just 20 hours. What has she achieved beyond giving herself worldwide headlines and moving the world a little closer to the possibility of one misstep, one miscalculation and something horrendous?
Well, she would say that she's achieved a reaffirmation of America's commitment to help Taiwan defend itself, to pledge to help American allies. But I think what she is in fact achieved is to set off a crisis that the Biden administration didn't need, that Xi Jinping didn't want, but now both sides have to sort of carry through on their actions in order to continue to look tough and establish resolve and credibility with the other.
So how then, having launched such a massive retaliation, how can China re-normalize its relationship with the United States? How does it get the guns off the table and just go back to sort of glowering at each other?
Well, I actually think this will be the new normal. And keep in mind, for the last year and a half, China has been staging what has been the most sustained show of force in the Taiwan Strait in more than a generation. I mean, roughly every few days, China has sent dozens of aircraft and half a dozen or so warships. Many of them have been going across the median line in the middle of the Taiwan Strait. So that had been going on, and now it looks like China is dramatically, obviously, increasing the number of those incursions as well as carrying out blockade simulation. And so I think that this is going to be sort of the new normal. And we've seen this after other crises in 2012 when China and Japan got in a spat over the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands. China ramped up its armed Coast Guard presence around those rocks and reefs in 1995, 1996. In all of these cases, China has used demonstrations of force to signal its resolve, and I expect that to continue for the foreseeable future.
So if that continues for the foreseeable future, then that sounds like it's going to be really quite damaging for the Taiwanese economy, because they are effectively blockaded. No one's flying in. No one's bringing goods in by ship.
So I'm hopeful that there won't be a full-on blockade of Taiwan. That would be incredibly difficult for China to sustain, and that would be an act of war and would trigger hostilities between Taiwan and China and possibly involving the United States. But I do think these sort of simulated actions, these demonstrations, these shows of force are going to be a regular occurrence in and around the Taiwan Strait, probably every few days, again, for the foreseeable future. And this is, in fact, what China has been doing for a year and a half now. It's just obviously on a much grander scale.
You've predicted that China will launch what you call a cataclysmic war over Taiwan. Just explain to us under what sort of conditions or with what sort of provocation?
So the war is certainly not inevitable, but we are entering a very dangerous period because China, on the one hand, has a window of opportunity to seize Taiwan. China's coming off 10 years of massive military mobilization. It's been churning out warships and ammunition at a rate we haven't seen from another country since World War II. And at the same time, the United States and Taiwan have been very slow to make their own forces more resilient. They're extremely vulnerable to China's missiles because they're parked at a few large bases and are basically sitting in the open. So China probably has the best chance that it would ever have to make a move on Taiwan. It doesn't guarantee that there will be such an action, but if you fast forward to the 2030s, the United States and Taiwan have very ambitious plans to revamp their militaries, to make them much more resilient, to spread out their forces. And at the same time, China confronts a number of other headwinds, the economic slowdown, the demographic collapse, and just a sort of sense that countries are starting to encircle China. Its neighbors are increasing their defense spending and increasing their alliance connections with the United States. So things seem to be getting darker for China. And so you just have to worry that if China is in fact intent on bringing Taiwan back into the fold, and because there aren't really peaceful options for doing that, given that the Taiwanese people definitely do not want reunification, you just have to worry that this period in the 2020s is the danger zone, and that we need to be especially vigilant and really try to ramp up the deterrent forces that the United States and Taiwan have in the Strait to hopefully prevent that war from breaking out.
OK, so let's speculate then about what might happen in those circumstances if China did invade Taiwan. One wonders, would the world be as swift to react with punitive sanctions against such a massive export market and manufacturing resource as it has been with Russia?
I think you're right. I think sanctions against China are much more complicated than against Russia. On the other hand, China does have a number of vulnerabilities because, Russia is a major commodities producer and exporter. China is the world's largest importer of food and energy resources. And so there's a lot of pulse points that if you were to have a sanctions or a blockade regime imposed on China, there are ways to squeeze it, albeit the cost would be enormous on the United States and its allies as well. I don't know if you're guaranteed to see a big international sanctions regime. I think you are almost guaranteed to see direct U.S. military action, probably involving the Japanese as well. And then if the war becomes protracted and ends up lasting months or even years, then I think the number of countries that start to join in various ways, even from afar, even if they're only imposing sanctions or helping to sustain a distant blockade of Chinese oil imports, say through the Strait of Malacca, I think that actually is extremely likely. And in some ways, Russia's invasion of Ukraine kind of alerted the United States and its allies that these things are real, kind of set in place already the collusion that has allowed them to get together and plan these things, which has made it more likely if there is a future war.
OK, and on American potential involvement, when Nancy Pelosi landed a couple of days ago, she tweeted, "Our delegation's visit to Taiwan honours America's unwavering commitment to supporting Taiwan's vibrant democracy." But can Taipei really believe that after seeing the US's hasty dash out of Afghanistan, which left a lot of actual allies concerned about American reliability, never mind a territory about which America maintains this strategic ambiguity?
I don't think you can ever 100% guarantee that your ally will come to your aid. But I would point out that Taiwan is a very different case than Afghanistan. I mean, even though the United States and Taiwan technically aren't allies, you have the Taiwan Relations Act, which says that it is U.S. law that the United States has to maintain its own capacity to be able to help Taiwan defend itself. It has to sell arms to Taiwan and help it resist any resort to coercion that might infringe on its sovereignty or way of life. So that's that is American law. And certainly President Biden has said on multiple occasions that he would intervene militarily. That's a big deal. And the Pentagon has been planning for this exact war scenario for a long time. So there are a lot of forces that are already pushing the United States to have a quick reaction. I personally think that it's almost guaranteed the United States would come to Taiwan's aid, but certainly if it's a lot different to be sitting in Taipei, for example, right now and having to trust those words.
OK, well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael Beckley from Tufts University in the United States. Let's bring in Robert Daly in the conversation. He's the director of the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on China and the United States. Welcome back to DW. When you and I spoke at the start of this week, you suggested that Nancy Pelosi's visit was essentially a general show of support for Taiwan. Given that everything that's happened, would you say it was worth it?
No, I don't think it was worth it. I think that if she hadn't gone to Taiwan, we would not now see these missiles flying over Taiwan, coming into Taiwan's territorial seas, and also flying into Japan's exclusive economic zone. This is a disproportionate, escalatory response on China's part, but it's a predictable escalatory response, and it could have been avoided if the trip hadn't been made, at least for a period of time.
Right. So Beijing's now ceasing cooperation with the US in a number of important areas, including military talks and climate change. How badly damaged are relations?
I think they are quite severely damaged. Of course, they were in bad shape anyway. Our military-to-military talks, our climate change talks, these were occasional. They were not being participated in very enthusiastically by the Chinese side. So the actual cutoff of those talks in a week-to-week, month-to-month sense doesn't really signify much. But this already bad relationship now appears to be one step closer, I fear, to de-recognition. You know, if both sides persist in what they say are their non-negotiable interests, the logical conclusion of that is the end of formal diplomatic relations between the United States and China, which would be a major historic move, I think, in neither country's interest. But that seems to be where things are headed at the moment.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm sitting there thinking, well, there doesn't seem to be any way sort of down from this for China. Now it's made these bellicose threats and it's followed them through. There seems no way to sort of go back to the old normal, which, as you just outlined, was really quite frosty anyway.
Right. And the problem here is that the question of Taiwan and its status was always a foundational question in U.S.-China relations. In 1972, when Nixon went to China, this was the question that the Shanghai Communique attempted to solve, dodge, paper over. You can describe it in whatever way you want, but a series of agreements were reached that kept the peace in the region for about 50 years, and that allowed Taiwan and China to develop. Taiwan is still the key question. In that Shanghai Communique, the United States said that it acknowledged that people in Taiwan and mainland China both thought that there was only one China and that Taiwan was part of it. That was key to China. The United States, I don't think, is any longer willing to acknowledge that because time has passed and it's no longer true. The people in Taiwan see themselves, for the most part, as Taiwanese, not Chinese now.
And a quick word then about the timing of this confrontation. We have midterm elections coming up in the US and the National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, both of those in November, and neither side wants to look weak.
Right. But there's no good time for this to happen. If this happened at almost any point on the calendar, we could point to factors in both countries that made it hard for them to compromise. It's more than usually difficult right now, but I don't think it's an extraordinary time. I think that's been overplayed. Yes, Xi doesn't want to look weak. as he looks to be anointed for a third term, but he wouldn't want to look weak anyway. He has never wanted to look weak. He's quite consistent in that. And President Biden has been concerned almost from day one of his administration of the Republicans painting him as soft on China. So these are really ongoing conditions. They're not matters of the moment.
Good talking to you. Thanks for joining us. Robert Daly from the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on China and the United States.
Thank you.